So as an opening question, Shane, do you feel the focus of CEOs towards cybersecurity has increased during this pandemic, especially considering the magnitude of cybersecurity threat landscape? And has the ANZ board taken a greater interest in recent times seeing some of these cybersecurity events? Your thoughts?
Yeah, so thank you very much, and thanks for having me, and thanks for naming the business chamber after our bank, ANZ. I like it. That's great. Now, I just wanted to first step back and say absolutely. So the answer to that question is absolutely. It's on our radar. It's elevated more so than ever. The board spend an inordinate amount of time on it. I think there's something. I think banks are really quite different in this respect. You know, we're 185 years old. Actually, we've been in the security business for 185 years. If you think about what banking is at its heart, people trust us with their money. And, you know, the way we used to protect that money was, you know, we had big vaults and we had security guards with guns and, you know, bars on the window and all of that sort of stuff. And obviously, as money has become digitized over a period of time, we've had to keep up with the various security areas. So in a funny way, security is actually really a core capability of banks. And so the cultural shift here hasn't been that great. Now, we've had to learn new techniques and tools and invest money and hire people and all of those things. But I think it's really important to note the cultural alignment is very, very strong. Yeah. We have seen, however, you know, we deal with customers, you know, we've got 8 million customers here in Australia and New Zealand. We deal with Fortune 500 companies in 32 countries around the world, including in India. I think it's fair, and this is a gross generalization, but I'll make it anyway. Banks, pretty good, continue to get better. Corporates, pretty ordinary and pretty broad brush approach. A lot, I would say, almost ignorant about the risks and assume somebody else is looking after it for them. They sort of abdicate responsibility to either the government or their service providers, whether it's a software company or maybe even the bank, and haven't really thought about it. And they're very, very exposed to risk. And we see that all the time through to other companies who are increasingly thinking about it. I think the most mature companies, and in fact, I hope ANZ is in the space, going back to that car analogy we've leapt on, you know, there's an old sort of joke within banks when thinking about risk of any type was, you know, why do cars have brakes? And of course, you know, your first sort of naive answer is to slow down and say, no, cars have brakes to allow the car to drive faster, right? Because if you didn't have a brake, you wouldn't be able to drive very fast. So the better the brakes, the faster you can drive. And so if we start to think about actually cybersecurity and security as actually enabling the business to proceed and innovate faster, it's an enabler. It's not something slowing you down. It's not just about the defense, although I understand the value of that. It's also about the opportunity. And I think increasingly, certainly somebody like us increasingly sees the opportunity that emerges around really truly understanding cyber risk and being able to educate and bring our customers along in this journey. And then one final comment on this, Chetan, which is, I'm sort of humbled by the people on this panel who know a lot more about this than I do. But what we do know at the bank is that our number one cybersecurity protection is our people. And, you know, yes, we have to have systems. Yes, we have to have technology. Yes, we have to have all of those great firewalls and all those things. And, you know, they get more and more complicated and more expensive. But our number one security device is our people. And it is their risk awareness, their questioning, their culture, you know, that has protected us and continues to time and time again.
Thank you so much, Shane. And I think looking at how the banks were protecting money with the guns and coming to this stage with so much of digital, especially forced into the digital world due to the pandemic, and your analogy about the car and the brakes and the speed, I think it gives a larger perspective of how you are focused to protect your people and your consumers and the money. Truly appreciate your thought on that. Let me turn to Terry with that. Terry, looking ahead and listening to Shane, what is the new normal from a cybersecurity and its importance for business resilience? You talked about it as a keynote speaker as well. What's your thought there?
Right. So what we've seen since 2014, 2015 is a dramatic shift. So earlier on, there was a focus on everyone was targeting governments and financial institutions. And then we saw that online crime and fraud moved online. And it moved online all in. Low-level criminals, high-end gangs. Why? Because the cost of entry is relatively low. It's relatively easy to learn or buy the skill sets. It's difficult to investigate and prosecute, and it's very lucrative. And even if you're targeting small businesses, if you hit 100 or 1,000 and you get a few thousand from each one, right, that can accumulate very quickly. So in the beginning, we started with perimeter defense. And then we were very reactive. We tend to be very reactive in this realm, and we are additive. So new threat vector, new technology, new threat vector, but we haven't re-baselined, right? We've just added, and we've made it extraordinarily complex. So now what the trends are is to focus on the jewels, what is most critical to you, transactions, key data, and then to back up everything else, right? The kind of thing that if I have a copy of it, I don't care if someone else has it. Stop trying to defend everything, because as we know in the national security arena, when you try to defend everything, you're defending nothing. And put your limited resources in a very strategic way, focused on risk. And that's why I talk about risk the most. And so we're moving to those next generation technologies of encryption, obfuscation, as opposed to a fortress, and zero trust, which is where you assume that the bad guys are already in, which in the national security arena, we always do.
Thanks, Terry. Just to follow up on that as well, how do you expect the cyber threat landscape to evolve, especially from a perspective of impacting global corporations? And what's your view on that?
Yeah. So remember, bad guys follow the money. And also bad guys can be state actors who are following the money. So as those of us who have been in this arena, really focused on cyber and bad guys since the late 1990s, there are certain nation states that are highly sophisticated, right? And don't have rules and go for the money or go for disruption, right? And so that is just going to, until there's more international accountability, right? Until more of these cases are investigated, opened up, and then state actors are held accountable, that will continue to rise, okay? And then for criminals, it's similar, it's that issue of investigation, right? The other thing that we're seeing, obviously, is as campaigns evolve, we need to see more cooperation across industry sectors and with government. But I don't think it's realistic that industry will cooperate directly with government because it's their reputation, right, of their company on the line. And so there need to be more nonprofits. I prefer university-based nonprofits because then you can do research at the same time, where we're sharing, as we do in the United States, we have centers across our sectors to share information, but it's internal network information. And I am more about outside in. I call it the satellite imagery of risk. So risk monitoring capabilities that are now globally available as a commodity. They track your activity of what's going in and out of your network and where your data sets are going. So I think there need to be more consortiums in between government and industry to share not only information, known knowns within networks, but those unknown unknowns of what's hitting our networks from the outside globally. And then we can raise the bar for everybody because we bake that in. And one last point, there's a great example in the US called the Cyber Threat Alliance. It was started by competitors. So Fortinet, Intel, Cisco, Palo Alto Networks decided that security was not going to be a differentiator, a competitive differentiator, like we do with the airlines, right? Safety is never a differentiator, okay? It doesn't help the airline industry when planes are falling out of the sky, okay? They came together to share their insights at speed and to break campaigns. I want to see that across the ISPs, the MSPs, right? We can't have security being a differentiator. You share everything, and then you make your product lines, your services, your differentiator. Again, then we can raise the bar for everybody.
Thanks, Terry. I think that's a very different point of view, purely from a perspective of the government and the industry, and especially your example about it is the base which with which we'll have to move forward. So truly appreciate your thought there. Burgess, let me move to you after hearing Shane and Terry. You've been on both sides of the table, a CISO for one of the largest telecoms in APAC, and now a cybersecurity thought leader with a Big Four risk consulting company. As you have helped many organizations and companies uplift their cybersecurity program to more mature business enablement, what are the business and cybersecurity trends, especially concerning the newer realities that have taken place for almost 2 years now? It's just become a new normal with this.
Thanks, Chetan. 4 distinct trends. The first one is, as you said, as an ex-CISO of a bank and telecom company, as Terry rightly mentioned, the attacks have moved on. You first attacked banks where the money was, but now manufacturing, healthcare, and retail are the new sweet spot for hackers. These companies thought, who will attack a boring manufacturing plant? But today that's the maximum damage, because an attack on a bank and telecom loses data, but attack on a manufacturing healthcare loses lives. A second trend is you could be attacked not only for who you are, but more importantly, to whom you can give access. So third-party security and what we know as the famous Operation Cloudhopper, where tech companies and fintech companies could be attacked to provide a larger playing ground for hackers. Increased usage of AI ML in both cyber attacks and defense. Mobile is a new target with increase in IoT and 5G tech. The age of automated hacking is here. And finally, we now live in an era of targeted ransomware, where normal spray and pray attacks are getting lesser and attacks are getting increasingly sophisticated and targeted.
Thank you so much, Burgess. I would want to turn to Professor, and I think I'll also take a cue from you, Burgess, on the AI space and the ML space. So, Professor, dealing with cybersecurity breaches investigations is like finding a needle in a haystack. Similarly, picking up earlier indicators of compromising on an ongoing cyber attack is a massive challenge for all of us, right? With your experience in AI, networking, and telecom as an eminent researcher, how do you see AI ML playing a key role in faster reaction time for detecting attacks and addressing gaps in the cybersecurity, which Terry alluded to, as well as Burgess talked about briefly for different industries?
Well, thank you very much for having me, and great to be among a very great thought leaders here in the panel. I truly enjoyed their point of view. So building on what they've discussed, which is basically, just quickly summary, is yes, if criminals follow money or follow power, which lead to money. And we have really seen that in fact, criminals in general really is, online crime is the fastest area of a crime. And this conference here and this summit is just a representative of the problem and the concern that have risen within the global society. We have really seen our reliance on technology is going even more and more. And we started to see the internet is being used as a vehicle to conduct these criminal activities. And these criminals, they're taking advantage of the internet. And we do have to remember one thing, that when the internet was first designed, it was designed for communication, and really security was not in mind. And therefore, now we really play in my view, it's a catch-up game and patches and all of that thing. We started to see that our government and businesses, they're all shifting online. I mean, if you look at the Australian cybersecurity strategy, I mean, we pretty much say 98% to 99% of all of our critical infrastructure, in fact, is operating online. Our banking systems, our small, medium-sized businesses, everything is online. And therefore, as Terry said, and Vegas, and that criminals really follow these opportunities. They see a fantastic. So I'm going to your question, what AI can do. Because of that fast area of a crime is moving so fast, manual fighting is not going to work. I mean, let me just, in cybersecurity, for example, stopping malicious activities using signature-based is not going to work. Trying to understand motivation and methods of criminals manually is not going to work. So really AI, even the advancements of the AI like deep learning and the advanced side of machine learning have been generally studied in many computer applications. They demonstrated significant improvements compared to traditional machine learning and the classic side of the AI, and have resulted really in the delivery of new industry standards in highly cognitive tasks. And that's including the image recognition, the audio classification, the speech translations, the NLP, the natural language processing, the computer game, and so on. However, really a relatively limited number of these studies have applied those powerful techniques to cybersecurity. And the reason for that is exactly what Terry said, is not just fighting cybercrime and cybersecurity, require partnership, require sharing data, sharing expertise. Is not just a matter of the AI. For the AI to work, you do have to access that level of data. And that's really a main challenge. So the AI has been exist perhaps even before the computer even first designed. The optimization and the mathematics behind of the machine learning and the AI. But what's new is the partnership is not quite there yet, in my view. Mm-hmm. And therefore, sharing, we don't have that level of transparency where we really truly can share data. So A can learn from B, and really criminals, they do, in fact, they're a great example on this. I conducted lots of research on the underground forums. Hackers, they do share expertise and knowledge, what's work and what's not going to work. Right. We, on the other side, have not taken that yet. There is a level of talk a lot about the importance of partnerships and so on. But for the AI to work, really, we do have that data. And in cybersecurity, we're not talking about just data. It's lots of data, because often criminals, they use the same method and tactics to attack different banks, to attack different systems. But for the AI in A to work, it has to be known. And this is where I say why criminals, in my view, are one step ahead. So that's my thoughts on the AI. So really, as the previous speakers, they talked about the obfuscations and the darknets and the virtual private network and the encryption and this direction of proxies. They're really all capable of facilitating a very successful cybercrime. And for investigation, look, completely, it's not going to work. Why? We are seeing a hacker in a country, victim in a different country, the means and technologies conducted in completely different countries. So we cannot just rely on investigations manually. The AI really has to happen. The partnership really has to implement it rightly. So the enterprises, in my view, are falling to keep up with the evolving really threats and landscape, massive data breaches, and and global warfare. So the speed is really constantly increasing. So fighting cybercrime and enhancing cybersecurity needs intelligence gathering and analysis and sharing. So really AI, in my view, is revolutionizing the cybersecurity. And all of the algorithms such as machine learning, deep learning, big data analytics, all of these revolutionizing the security. Because really they are offering us an opportunity to address the problems at a much larger scale. So they're allowing us to automate tasks that was previously only handled by a human security analyst. And smart ones of that are really few people, not so much. So in my view, the AI require two things. So either AI, you can find an AI, very good AI analyst, but relatively not so good in security and understanding that cybersecurity aspects.
Sure.
Or the vice versa. You've got the cybersecurity who understand the concept of cybersecurity, but not so good in data science and how the data science can be implemented in a right way. So this is just my take on for the AI to work, partnership need to be implemented.
Thanks, Professor. And I think you brought up very interesting points from a researcher's point of view, from a data, NLP, AI, where AI can work, and it's more of detection versus prevention. So with that, and I think that adds a lot of meat in terms of how we've looked at Shane's point of view, Terry's point of view, Burgess's point of view. Arup, let me turn to you with that. You bring in a practitioner's viewpoint from ground zero as a CISO from a leading IT-enabled service provider, which has seen a transition from the enterprise fenced operating models to remote working models, cloud-based delivery models. Shane referred to the bank being 185 years old, touching towards 200, the old ways into the new one. How do you see the service industry cope with the so-called new normal?
Thanks, Chetan. I think as some of our esteemed panelists have already spoken at length on the subject, I think the COVID-19 pandemic was completely unprecedented, as we've all spoken about it. And it was the driver for one of the fastest transformation journeys in such a short span of time in order to be able to deliver the business resiliency requirements of supporting the business operations. The need of the hour was to relook at the existing enterprise fence data center-based operating architecture, what we typically call as a castle and moat-based architecture, and transform that into a hybrid working model that allowed a distributed workforce flexibility to work from anywhere. While the technology answers to the problem statement was not such a complexity, there were solutions available. Stitching them together so fast, coupled with the end user change management, the user side of the awareness posed an uphill journey. Some of the fundamental components that a lot of service providers had to put into play once they got out of the offices were remote working tech stack, including creating secure private networks to data centers, routing those connections back into the remote client data centers across the globe, and still maintaining the same high standards of data security and privacy. Some of the other key pillars that we went through the journey with were securing the compute infrastructure, which included adoption of cloud VDI-based computing, use of zero trust framework and principles for the user authentication and conditional access, a very important focus on endpoint compliance because we had moved out on the internet with the users. And so basically we had to move to augmented hybrid models of orchestration and management infrastructure, right? The change infrastructure was like changing tires in a moving car for some of us, was an additional complexity under the uncertainty of the volatile threat landscape with exponential attacks to the enterprises and individuals. It will be worthwhile to mention that security teams were at the forefront of establishing defenses and monitoring mechanisms in dealing with the new generation of adversaries. Not only did it require scale, as some of our panelists have already spoken about, but also the ability for the staff to have a battle-ready mindset and move from a reactive monitoring approach to a proactive approach to defend against these attacks. So to conclude, in order to keep pace with the new normal for us, there's a clear need for continued transformation in security and technology levers for a sustainable operating model. I think the need of the hour is a borderless enterprise design that can adapt to the variabilities of the operating models of the business and the changing threat landscape.
Thanks, Arup.
Thanks.
Really appreciate your thought here. With that, I want to go back to Shane once again. Shane, there's always a debate between balancing the business goal and looking at security solution spends. As a CEO of one of the largest banks, do you believe that organizations, companies are spending enough on countermeasures in light of that risk? And I would leave it open to hear from you. What do you think should be done, and what is your thought process, or what do you think we should be looking at?
Yeah, thanks. And again, I think banks are different. I mean, in the fact that there is no such thing as a bank if we're not secure. So like, this is our survival. So if people don't trust us with their data or their money or think we're vulnerable, we're dead. We don't have a bad quarter. We're gone. So, so I don't think banks in general, I think the question for us is not so much, and, banks have capacity to spend. The challenge for us is not the budget, it's how do we get value? And I don't mean in economic, but where do we spend the money? Mm-hmm. And Terry's point about the complexity of the landscape, literally a day doesn't go by where I don't have somebody pitching to us some new whiz-bang solution for cyber, right? So on one hand, I got all these criminals attacking us with stuff, and on the other hand, I got all these consultants and people and vendors telling me they got the solution. So, I'm kind of trying to deal with both. So, but I think in corporate world, and again, I'm probably being unfair, I don't think corporates in general spend enough time. I go back to some of the other panelists' comments, the move now, manufacturing companies. I mean, just look at the ransomware attacks at the moment have just skyrocketed.
Yep.
Like, it's an unbelievable, and many of us only hear the ones that are made public. Well, I can tell you for everyone, I don't know what the stat is, but for every one made public, there's probably 10, 20, 30 that you never hear about. And that by definition is telling you that these companies haven't thought about it, don't have the right culture around risk management, haven't spent the money because they haven't really thought it's important. So I think, it's conversations like these to sort of say, hey, wake up, make sure you do think about spending the right money. And also the other one I think is don't be scared. Like, it's not, it kind of is rocket science, but it isn't really. There are solutions to these things, and you don't have to have, the capability of the National Security Agency in the United States, you can do this with relatively simple, good, common sense approach. And so don't be scared either. That would be my sort of advice to people as they're thinking it through.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Shane. And I think it's very difficult to put a very complex piece simply. And I truly appreciate the way you articulated it. I think you made it simple enough for our audiences to focus on what should be done and not be afraid of dealing with that. I think that's a great viewpoint from your side. Let me move to the professor. So industry is facing so much of increased demand after listening to all the panelists. How do you see academia can help bridge this gap for not only the corporates, but the industry in general?
Well, very important question. In fact, let me acknowledge what you said, that in fact, there is a cybersecurity shortage globally and in particularly in Australia. Both in the new cybersecurity strategy this year, 2020, and in the Australian Cybersecurity Growth Network Cybersecurity Sector Competitiveness Plan. And all of the reports out there confirm that Australia and globally has difficulty attracting and retraining the cybersecurity talent. And while the skill shortage is affecting the cybersecurity industry globally, there are signs that the lack of cybersecurity talent is among the worst in the world. That's in Australia. And Australian businesses here, if you want me to speak, struggle to find job-ready cybersecurity workers despite offering high wage payments. So it's acknowledged and reported quite well. Now, just building on the previous speakers, they said cybersecurity is not just a technical problem. Some of the speakers said, maybe it's a business. Others say maybe it's more of a risk. Some see it as technical, some of it see it as a law and regulation. It is, in my view, cybersecurity is a complex, is multidisciplinary, that focus not just on technical skills, but also have other aspects and skills like education, criminology, human part, the psychology, and so on. Now, how do I see academia playing a role in filling the gap? So from teaching and learning point of view, in order to meet the demand for skilled cyber operator, education and training program must focus their effort to ensure that students are able to achieve mastery in fundamental of computing and information security. Without this knowledge, a graduate will find it difficult to adapt throughout their career as a threat and technology evolve rapidly. Hands-on experience is something very much important, and one of the most consistent criticism against cybersecurity education program is that an overemphasis on theory and not so much on hand-on experience. In my view, I think also how I see education also filling the gap in cybersecurity is universities and educational institutes should provide students with some softer skills. And this is where you a bit moving away from the IT. You often see there is no good in bits and bytes, but so poor in communication and writing. So and that's a challenge in my view. The first priority in cybersecurity education and training program must be built on the technical proficiency in their students. However, having technical skills, as I said, alone is not enough. You do have to equip that with softer skills, and teamwork and communication and problem solving are very crucial for new hires. So just speaking out from for my university, Charles Darwin University, we do in fact have adapted to the need to fill the gap in cybersecurity, and we started having a specialized program in cybersecurity that it is multidisciplinary program where we equip students with technical and non-technical skills to help filling the skill shortage gap and provide the job ready for cybersecurity graduate students to workforce. Now these courses, and I see it, I've started also seeing other universities started really moving forward fast to make that demand too. So I see academic institution is playing in fact a major role, and the industry academic partnership is very important to give them that real life experience.
Thank you so much, Professor. And I do believe that I think the universities and academia will play a major role, especially in the supply chain, keeping in mind how the new normal is posing a lot of challenges for the new workforce to be protected from so many things. With that, Burgess, organizations, especially the financial sectors, fintechs, financial institutions, banks, insurance companies, they spend a lot of dollars. And I think to Shane's point, when he talked about that, it's something which every financial institution and a bank and a leader of those should do. Efforts in creating security awareness for its consumer base has to be there. However, customers still keep falling to frauds, which could be prevented probably if they have followed the base hygiene practice or base rules of what has been communicated by these companies, financial institutions. What advice do you have for business organizations in this regard?
Thanks, Chetan. Clearly keeping it simple, some of the most common ways to prevent cyber attacks include do the basics, but as Terry mentioned, they alone will not help you from being breached. Aggressively hunt the attacker within your network. We call it active hunting. Tori in Japanese means attack the attacker and aggressively go for him and weed him out of your network. Assume, in brackets, often enough, a state of breach, and check and keep on fine-tuning your crisis responses. And finally, only the paranoid survive. Hence, update your team's technical skills and seek out the best and most agile talent and get them into your core team so as to stay safe and secure. We have 3 controls: preventive, detective, and corrective. But you cannot prevent an attack in a borderless world. Hence, detective, corrective, and then preventive controls are the new norm for helping companies stay secure and safe.
Thank you, Burgess. Right from the organizations to the consumer, That's a good viewpoint. Terry, coming to you, do you see cybersecurity become a key priority for boardroom conversations and increased responsibility on the board to keep the pulse on the organization's cyber maturity and risks? What's your viewpoint on that? Being a CEO of providing solutions to not only the industry, but smaller and larger organizations as you navigate.
So I think boards are waking up, but they're not waking up fast enough, and they're not taking ownership fast enough. For instance, the first time that we actually had a CEO was fired as the result of a major breach was Target in 2015. The share price has never totally regained after that. That should have been an international wake-up call to all boards. But there is a disadvantage, which is 90% of all companies and organizations don't have a CIO, a CISO, a deep security in-house team, and we forget that. And so they tended to just give it to the COO or the CFO or the IT lead, okay? But they don't have cybersecurity expertise. So as a result of this, a lot of security providers, to include us, created cyber risk programs. And the idea was to have a third party that's checking on your inside team, if you're right, or on your managed service provider. And now there are the technologies, because of what we were discussing about AI. We have large risk data sets, we have risk-based AI analytics, and we can provide those outside monitoring hacker view services that can report directly to the executive team or board. And they are now, can work in tandem with software-based red teams that are not intrusive. And so there are commercial commodity capabilities where you can build a cyber risk program around, and you can get that sanity check on a quarterly basis. And I'm seeing more and more of that adopted. And I call it the cyber audit, right? You would never have a company with a CFO that doesn't have an annual audit. We have to have companies with annual or quarterly cyber audits.
Terry, can I interrupt? Because I'm sorry to be rude, but another thing, just to build on that, Terry, I think you're right. And I think another thing we've noticed with our customers is, and it's a subtle difference, I think too many of our customers think about this thing, well, if this happens to me, we go, no, you have to have it is going to happen to you.
Yes.
You are going to have a cyber attack. Don't
it's a matter of when, yes.
In the future, and I'll worry if it is absolutely going to happen. And so you just have to have that attitude in the way that you approach it, right?
Thanks, Shane. I think that's critical, because what you bring onto the table and what Terry mentioned about the wake-up call for the boards, wake-up call of see what's coming your way. It's just a matter of time. How do you give right attention right from the board to focusing on prevention, detection, leveraging technology, driving universities from a supply chain so that there's a balance between the workforce trying to come into the industry to prevent, detect, and drive a lot of security for all of us. With that, I'll move to the last question to Arup. Arup, the idea of the perimeter security has significantly evolved from a castle and moat-based approach to securing cloud and colonies, particularly concerning cyber. Is there a perimeter anymore? How do you secure it? What's your viewpoint?
Thanks, Chetu. I think, in my opinion, most of the regulated industry, IT services industries, traditionally operated under the guarded walls with focus on defined perimeter, which was built with the use of traditional network security, firewalls, intrusion prevention platforms, strong segmentation, DMZs, operations from private networks. The people, process, and tech operated within this defined perimeter, including to a great extent within the physical boundaries of the enterprise, physical security layers, and under supervisory controls. The term supervisory controls is very important because that is something that significantly changed when people moved out. I think the enterprise has changed. It's dynamic. It's no longer on-prem. Cloud services, employee mobility requirements, including work from home under the new normal, borderless intercompany collaboration has rendered the perimeter very fluid. We have seen rapid movement of data and workloads to the cloud, including adoption of SaaS platforms, hybrid extended architecture built on cloud providers. With this, the perimeter extended into a more fluid and dynamic state. Securing these complex boundaries required an approach that goes beyond the traditional approach of authentication segmentation and now needs considerations for factors such as device integrity, real-time user context. Additional levels of controls, including multi-factor authentication, conditional access built on the principles of zero trust that I spoke about earlier, to ensure verify anything and everything trying to connect into the systems before granting access to resources, services, or information, whether these resources lie in your data center or on the cloud. To sum it up, organizational perimeters are now pivotal around the users, endpoints, applications, and resources. Therefore, the security layers have to take these factors into consideration, apart from and obviously combining with them the conventional network boundaries that were available earlier. So key takeaway here is the concept of a human firewall. The perimeter has to be built around the individual, which is not just a technology control, but a lot to do with the way we train and raise this bar of security awareness with our individuals.
Thank you so much, Arup. I think that brings us to the end of the panel conversation. Before I conclude, Shane, any last thoughts from you before we sign off for today? As a panel conversation, as well as I think we heard viewpoints from varied industry experts. And then we can sign off, and truly thank you for all of your time and your insights. Shane, last comments from you.
No, not really. I mean, I think it's pretty clear this is such a serious issue. And, if anything, it's reminded myself actually listening to the others, and I'm going to go back and sort of re-energize my own learning around these areas, because, that's another thing. This is such a fast evolving area. And when you think you've kind of got to somewhere, the goalposts move. And so it's about being dynamic, and it's also about constantly learning. And I think the benefit of these sorts of network, having a network of people that you can talk to and keep advice and understand best practice is really, I think, important. And, for us, that's really important. And we reach out to all sorts of people in all sorts of industries to really listen and learn. And I think that's really critical for the future for everybody, irrespective of what level of maturity you're at. You're going to have to continue to get better. But thank you for the opportunity today.
Thank you, Shane. Truly appreciate it. Thank you, Shane. Thank you, Arup, Terry, Professor Burgess, for your time. With that, we'll conclude the panel for today, and we'll move on to the next segment of the event. I would like to introduce Rajat to moderate the next session and take the webinar to the next segment. Rajat is a founding board member for ANZ India Business Chamber and Senior Vice President, Head of APAC for Payment Services, ATRA. With over 20 years of experience in the IT industry and a particular focus on the banking and payment sector, Rajat has a unique understanding of cyber risk. I now welcome him to lead the next phase of our webinar. Over to you, Rajat.